23-year-old Karla Knox never imagined that a simple family dinner in Riverside, California would nearly cost her life, or that the woman who was supposed to protect her would be the one orchestrating her downfall. What started as suspicious coincidences around her severe nut allergies would eventually unravel into a calculated campaign of medical manipulation that left doctors stunned and a family shattered. But it was Karla's own methodical documentation that would ultimately expose a truth so disturbing it would change everything she thought she knew about trust, family, and survival. The evidence was all there in the EpiPen usage log, a pattern so deliberate, so chilling, that when investigators finally saw it, they couldn't believe someone could be so calculated in their cruelty. This is the story of how a young woman's fight for her life became a fight for justice, and how sometimes the most dangerous predators hide behind the mask of family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Karla Knox had always been the cautious type. Growing up with severe tree nut and shellfish allergies meant reading every ingredient label twice, carrying multiple EpiPens, and having emergency action plans memorized by heart. Her father, Robert Knox, a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant, had drilled safety protocols into her since childhood. Her mother, Janet, who passed away when Karla was 16, had been equally vigilant, turning their modest two-bedroom home in Riverside into what neighbors jokingly called the allergy-free fortress. But everything changed 3 years ago when Robert married Victoria Chambers, a real estate agent from Newport Beach who seemed to have stepped out of a magazine. Victoria was everything Janet hadn't been: polished, social, ambitious. She drove a white BMW, wore designer clothes to PTA meetings, and had opinions about everything from Karla's career choices to her overly dramatic medical needs. "You know, honey," Victoria would say in her saccharine voice, adjusting her perfectly blown-out blonde hair, "I think you might be a little too dependent on those medical devices. My nephew had allergies as a child, and his mother just taught him to be more careful. He outgrew the whole thing by college." Karla, now working as a junior graphic designer at a small marketing firm downtown, had learned to bite her tongue during these conversations. She lived at home to save money while building her career, a decision that seemed smart when her father first remarried. The house was paid off, her commute was reasonable, and she genuinely wanted to support her father's new happiness after years of grief. But by October 2023, the household dynamics had shifted in ways that made Karla increasingly uncomfortable. Victoria had systematically redecorated the house, removing most traces of Janet's presence. The kitchen, once stocked with clearly labeled allergy-safe foods, now featured an array of gourmet nuts, exotic sauces, and seafood preparations that Victoria claimed were essential for proper entertaining. "We can't live in fear forever," Victoria announced one evening, unpacking bags from Whole Foods filled with pine nuts, cashews, and almond flour. "I refuse to let one person's medical issues dictate how this entire household operates." Robert, caught between his new wife and his daughter, had grown increasingly withdrawn. The man who once meticulously checked restaurant menus and carried backup EpiPens now seemed to defer to Victoria's judgment on everything, including Karla's medical care. The first real incident happened on a Thursday evening in late October. Karla had been working late on a client presentation when she came home to find dinner already prepared: Victoria's famous Thai curry. The aroma hit her the moment she walked through the door, and something felt off. Victoria had made Thai food before, always assuring Karla it was safe, but tonight the smell seemed different, richer, more complex. "I used a new recipe I found online. It's supposed to be more authentic. I even went to that little Asian market downtown to get proper ingredients." Karla hesitated at the kitchen table, studying the curry. Small dark specks floated in the coconut milk base, and she could see what looked like crushed nuts mixed throughout the vegetables. "Are you sure there aren't any tree nuts in this?" she asked, holding her spoon without taking a bite. Victoria's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of irritation crossing her features before the bright smile returned.
Of course I'm sure. I've been cooking for this family for 3 years, Karla. I think I know how to read a recipe by now. It's just that I can smell something, Karla began, but Victoria cut her off. You smell coconut and spices, unless you're allergic to flavor now, too. Her laugh had an edge to it. Honestly, sweetheart, you can't live your whole life being paranoid about every meal. Robert looked up from his plate, where he'd already consumed half his serving. It tastes great, honey. Sam as always. But Karla's instincts screamed danger. Years of living with life-threatening allergies had honed her senses in ways most people couldn't understand. She could detect trace amounts of allergens in foods that appeared completely safe. Her throat already felt slightly scratchy, and a familiar tingling sensation was beginning in her lips. I think I'm going to pass tonight, she said, pushing back from the table. I had a big lunch, and I'm not really hungry.
Oh, come on, Victoria pressed, her voice taking on a peculiar intensity. You barely ate anything yesterday. You're going to waste away. Just try a small bite. I spent 2 hours making this from scratch. The pressure in Karla's chest was building now, and she recognized the early warning signs of an allergic reaction. Her skin was beginning to flush, and that metallic taste was creeping into her mouth. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile floor. I need to get my EpiPen, she said, moving toward the hallway where she kept her medical bag. Really? Victoria's voice followed her, dripping with skepticism. You haven't even eaten anything. How could you possibly be having a reaction? But Karla was already in her room, hands shaking as she pulled out her EpiPen and antihistamines. The reaction was accelerating faster than usual, her breathing becoming labored. She administered the epinephrine injection and immediately felt the familiar surge of adrenaline flooding her system. When she returned to the kitchen 15 minutes later, still trembling from the medication, Victoria was loading the dishwasher with unusual efficiency. Feeling better? Victoria asked without turning around. I hope you realize how expensive those EpiPens are. Your father's insurance doesn't cover everything, you know. I'm alive, Karla replied simply, sinking into her chair. The reaction had been real. Her body was still recovering from the epinephrine crash. Well, of course you are, Victoria said, her voice carrying a strange undertone. It's not like you were actually in danger. You didn't even eat anything. That night, as Karla lay in bed replaying the evening's events, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Victoria's behavior had been off. The insistence on her trying the food, the quick cleanup, the dismissive comments about the EpiPen cost, and there was something else, something that nagged at the edge of her consciousness. She got up from the bed, walked to the kitchen, turning on the light, and examining the now empty curry pot in the sink. At the bottom, barely visible beneath the soapy water, were the unmistakable remnants of crushed cashews. Victoria had lied. Not only had there been tree nuts in the curry, but based on the amount of residue, they'd been a significant ingredient. And if Victoria had been cooking with nuts, cross-contamination would have been inevitable throughout the kitchen. Karla felt a chill that had nothing to do with the late hour. This wasn't a mistake or an oversight. Victoria had deliberately prepared a meal containing her allergens, pressured her to eat it, and then tried to gaslight her about the severity of her reaction. Standing in the dim kitchen, staring at the evidence of what could have been a fatal deception, Karla made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and opened a new note, typing carefully. October 26th, 2023, 8:47 p.m. EpiPen used after exposure to cashews in Thai curry prepared by Victoria. She denied nuts were present, but physical evidence proves otherwise. Reaction symptoms, throat constriction, lip tingling, facial flushing, respiratory distress. Recovery time? 45 minutes. She didn't know it yet, but this first entry in what would become a detailed log would eventually expose a pattern of deliberate medical endangerment that shocked even seasoned investigators. What she thought was documenting a single incident of carelessness was actually the beginning of uncovering a calculated campaign designed to make her doubt her own medical reality or potentially eliminate her altogether.
As she climbed back into bed, Karla couldn't have imagined that this was only the beginning, and that Victoria's next attempts would be far more sophisticated and dangerous.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The weeks following the Thai curry incident transformed Karla's perspective on her living situation from uncomfortable to genuinely concerning. What she had initially dismissed as Victoria's ignorance about food allergies began revealing itself as something far more calculated and sinister. It started with the grocery shopping. Victoria had always been particular about household purchases, but now she seemed obsessed with introducing foods that Karla couldn't safely consume. The pantry, once a carefully curated collection of allergy-friendly staples, became a minefield of potential triggers. Jars of pesto made with pine nuts appeared next to the pasta. Bottles of walnut oil materialized in the cooking section. Even the supposedly safe granola bars Victoria bought contained warnings about tree nut processing facilities. "I found these amazing energy bars at Trader Joe's," Victoria announced one Saturday morning, placing a box directly in front of Karla's usual breakfast spot. "They're organic and packed with protein, perfect for busy career women." Karla picked up the box and immediately spotted the allergy warning printed in small text along the bottom. "These are processed in a facility with tree nuts," she said, setting the box aside. "Oh, that's just legal nonsense," Victoria waved dismissively, pouring herself coffee from an expensive French press, another recent addition to the kitchen. "Companies put those warnings on everything now to avoid lawsuits. My trainer says those bars are the best thing on the market." "Victoria, cross-contamination warnings aren't legal nonsense. They're literally the difference between life and death for people like me." Victoria's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "People like you? You mean people who use their medical conditions to control everyone around them?" The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Karla stared at her stepmother, trying to process the casual cruelty of the statement. Before she could respond, Robert walked into the kitchen, already dressed for his Saturday golf game with colleagues. "Morning, ladies. What's for breakfast?" he asked cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension crackling between his wife and daughter. "I was just telling Karla about these wonderful energy bars," Victoria said, her voice instantly brightening, "but apparently they're too dangerous for our household." Robert glanced at the box, then at Karla's face. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of the protective father she remembered from childhood. But instead, he just shrugged. "Maybe we could keep them in the garage pantry. That way, everyone's happy." The garage pantry. As if Karla's medical needs were something to be hidden away, like holiday decorations or old paint cans. She watched her father grab his golf clubs and kiss Victoria goodbye, leaving her alone with a woman who is becoming increasingly hostile about her very existence. That afternoon, while Victoria attended an open house in Anaheim, Karla decided to conduct a thorough inventory of the kitchen. What she discovered made her stomach drop. Nearly every new food item Victoria had purchased in recent weeks contained potential allergens or carried cross-contamination warnings. The pattern was too consistent to be accidental. In the spice cabinet, she found a new bottle of sesame oil. Karla had never mentioned sesame allergies because she didn't have them, but the oil was positioned directly next to her emergency antihistamines. The refrigerator contained a gourmet cheese spread made with pine nuts, placed on the same shelf as Karla's lunch leftovers. Even the supposedly safe granola bars Victoria bought contained warnings about tree nut processing facilities. "I found these amazing energy bars at Trader Joe's," Victoria announced one Saturday morning, placing a box directly in front of Karla's usual breakfast spot. "They're organic and packed with protein, perfect for busy career women." Karla picked up the box and immediately spotted the allergy warning printed in small text along the bottom. "These are processed in a facility with tree nuts," she said, setting the box aside. "Oh, that's just legal nonsense," Victoria waved dismissively, pouring herself coffee from an expensive French press, another recent addition to the kitchen.
Companies put those warnings on everything now to avoid lawsuits. My trainer says those bars are the best thing on the market. Victoria, cross-contamination warnings aren't legal nonsense. They're literally the difference between life and death for people like me. When she felt that both the recent Thai curry incident and the increase in allergy episodes within the home were caused by her stepmother to induce allergic reactions for financial gain after her dad passed away, she decided to place a small camera in her house to watch the overnight activities in the kitchen. What Jessie observed was more than alarming, shocking. Her father had been pacing through the kitchen without anyone recognizing this. She thought that was the reason she was coming down with allergies more often. She also noticed that he had under desk and under bed and trash can stickers in the entire kitchen. She was surprised to find out that after their house was purchased by her father, he had also purchased these stickers as well. She was also convinced that her stepmother was just playing along because of the insurance she would receive after her dad passed away. She then decided to remove the stickers in the kitchen to prevent the allergies from strengthening in her father's body. However, it was already too late, as her father passed away a few days after she had contacted her family lawyer about what was happening. However, once her dad was home from getting his treatment, he called the family lawyer and had him change all his insurance and everything else in law to make sure his daughter and his stepdaughter did not receive a single penny from the insurance. Since his father had been diagnosed with a terminal illness before his passing, he also made sure no one in the family received anything in his will except for charity. This brings me to the end.
The most unsettling pattern involved Victoria's behavior during and after these incidents. Rather than showing concern or offering help, Victoria consistently responded with skepticism, annoyance, and comments about the cost of Karla's medications. She had also begun timing Karla's reactions, often asking questions like, "How long before you feel better?" or "How many EpiPens do you think you'll need this month?" On November 15th, the pattern escalated dramatically. Karla came home from work to find Victoria hosting what she called a cultural appreciation dinner for several of her real estate colleagues. The dining room table was laden with an elaborate spread of international dishes, each one seemingly designed to trigger every allergy Karla possessed. "There's my stepdaughter," Victoria announced as Karla walked through the door. "Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about your fascinating medical condition." "Linda here has a cousin with food sensitivities, don't you, Linda?" Linda, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled warmly. "Oh yes, my cousin Sarah has to be so careful with gluten. It's amazing how food can affect people so differently." "Exactly." Victoria's voice had that same peculiar intensity Karla remembered from the curry night, although some people are much more dramatic about their reactions than others. Karla here practically lives in fear of food. Don't you, sweetheart? The other guests looked uncomfortable as Victoria continued her monologue about anxiety-based food aversions and psychosomatic reactions. Karla excused herself, but not before noticing that Victoria had prepared individual place cards for the dinner guests, including one with Karla's name positioned directly in front of a dish that was clearly labeled pecan-crusted salmon with cashew sauce. That night, after the guests left and Robert had gone to bed, Victoria cornered Karla in the kitchen while she was preparing her own safe meal. "You embarrassed me tonight," Victoria said, her facade of pleasantness completely dropped. "Walking in here with your victim complex, making my guests uncomfortable with your dramatic medical needs." "I didn't say anything about my allergies," Karla replied, keeping her voice steady. "I just excused myself to avoid a potentially dangerous situation." "Dangerous," Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what's dangerous? A grown woman who uses fake medical emergencies to manipulate everyone around her. Your father is stressed constantly, worried about your next episode. It's affecting his health, his work, our marriage. My allergies aren't fake, Victoria. They're documented by multiple physicians. Physicians who probably make a fortune off your hypochondria." Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've done my research, Karla. I know exactly what you're doing. The dramatic reactions, the expensive medications, the constant attention-seeking behavior, it all stops now."
The conversation ended with Victoria storming upstairs, leaving Karla alone in the kitchen with a growing certainty that her stepmother wasn't just ignorant about her medical condition, she actively disbelieved it and seemed determined to prove her point regardless of the consequences. That night, Karla made her second crucial decision. She opened her laptop and began researching medical advocacy resources, patient rights, and documentation procedures for medical abuse. What she found terrified her. Stories of family members deliberately exposing relatives to allergens weren't uncommon, and they often escalated until someone ended up in the hospital or worse. She also discovered something that made her blood run cold. Insurance fraud related to fake allergic reactions was a growing concern, and some perpetrators had been known to deliberately trigger real reactions in their victims to prove the allergies were fabricated. The twisted logic was, if they could control the reaction, it couldn't be genuinely life-threatening. As she documented the evening's events in her growing log, Karla realized she was dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple ignorance or even casual cruelty. Victoria's behavior suggested a deliberate campaign to undermine her credibility, while simultaneously putting her in increasingly dangerous situations. The awakening was complete. Karla wasn't dealing with a difficult stepmother anymore. She was living with someone who viewed her medical condition as either a lie to be exposed or an obstacle to be eliminated. And with each passing day, Victoria was becoming bolder, more calculated, and infinitely more dangerous. The question now wasn't whether Victoria would escalate, it was how far she was willing to go to prove her point and whether Karla would survive long enough to expose the truth.
Armed with her growing documentation and the disturbing realization of Victoria's true intentions, Karla knew she needed professional validation of what was happening. Her first step was reaching out to Dr. Miranda Chen, the allergist who had managed her care since she was 19. Dr. Chen's office in downtown Los Angeles represented more than just medical expertise. It was Karla's lifeline to objective, documented proof that her condition was real and serious. The appointment on November 28th would prove to be a turning point. Karla had specifically requested an extended consultation, claiming she needed to discuss recent changes in symptom patterns and living environment factors. What she didn't tell the receptionist was that she planned to present her stepmother's behavior as a potential medical safety issue. Dr. Chen, a petite woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, had always been thorough in her approach to Karla's care. She listened intently as Karla explained the recent increase in allergic episodes, but when Karla began describing Victoria's dismissive comments and the suspicious timing of allergen introductions, Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly concerned. "Let me understand this correctly," Dr. Chen said, reviewing Karla's detailed timeline on her tablet. "Your stepmother has introduced multiple known allergens into your shared living space over the past 2 months, often with direct encouragement for you to consume these foods?" "That's correct. And when I have reactions, she questions whether they're real or suggests I'm being dramatic for attention." Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment, then pulled up Karla's medical history on her computer. "Karla, your allergies are extensively documented. We have records going back 4 years showing severe reactions to tree nuts and shellfish. Your last comprehensive allergy panel showed some of the highest sensitivity markers I've seen in my practice. There is absolutely no medical basis for questioning the legitimacy of your condition. Could you put that in writing? Could you provide documentation that confirms my allergies are real and potentially life-threatening?" "Of course. In fact, I'm going to do more than that." Dr. Chen turned to her computer and began typing rapidly. "I'm preparing a comprehensive medical summary that details your allergy history, severity ratings, and emergency protocols. I'm also including a section about environmental safety requirements for someone with your condition." While Dr. Chen worked, Karla felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Having a medical professional take her concerns seriously was the validation she desperately needed after weeks of gaslighting from Victoria. "I'm also recommending something else," Dr. Chen continued. Given the increase in your reaction frequency, I want you to start using an allergy tracking app that timestamps your EpiPen usage and allows you to photograph any environmental triggers. It's called Allergy Shield, and it's designed specifically for patients who need detailed documentation of their exposures and reactions. Dr. Chen walked Karla through setting up the app on her phone. Allergy Shield was sophisticated. It used GPS to track locations of reactions, allowed photo documentation of food labels and ingredients, and created detailed reports that could be shared with medical professionals or, if necessary, legal authorities. The app also has an emergency feature, Dr. Chen explained. If you use your EpiPen, it can automatically send your location and medical information to emergency contacts. I'm setting up your father and my office as primary contacts, but you can add others if needed. As they finished the appointment, Dr. Chen handed Karla a sealed envelope containing her medical summary and a separate document that made Karla's pulse quicken. It was titled Environmental Safety Protocol for High-Risk Allergy Patient and included specific guidelines for family members and caregivers. This document, Dr. Chen said seriously, outlines the legal and ethical responsibilities of people living with someone who has life-threatening allergies. If someone in your household is deliberately exposing you to allergens, they could be held liable for medical assault or worse. Driving home from the appointment, Karla felt empowered for the first time in months. She had professional medical validation, sophisticated documentation tools, and legal backing for her position. But she also knew that confronting Victoria directly would be dangerous. Instead, she decided to implement a strategy of quiet preparation and careful evidence gathering. Her next stop was somewhat unexpected, a consultation with Marcus Rodriguez, a family attorney who specialized in elder abuse and medical advocacy cases. Karla had found his practice through online research, and his reviews suggested he had experience with unusual family dynamics involving medical issues. Marcus's office in Century City was modest but professional. The attorney himself was younger than Karla had expected, probably in his early 30s, with an earnest demeanor that immediately put her at ease. "Tell me about your situation," Marcus said, settling behind his desk with a legal pad ready.
Karla presented her documentation, the timeline, photographs of receipts, screenshots of Victoria's shopping patterns, and Dr. Chen's medical summary. Marcus reviewed everything carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific incidents or Victoria's exact statements. "This is concerning," Marcus said finally. "What you're describing could potentially constitute several different legal violations: medical endangerment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and possibly even attempted assault, if we can prove deliberate intent to cause harm." "What would I need to prove intent?" Karla asked. "More documentation. Specifically, we'd need to establish a clear pattern of deliberate behavior that goes beyond simple negligence or ignorance. The shopping receipts are helpful, but we'd need evidence that she understood the danger and chose to proceed anyway." Marcus outlined a strategy that made Karla both nervous and determined. He suggested she continue documenting everything, while also attempting to engage Victoria in recorded conversations about her medical needs. If Victoria made statements that demonstrated awareness of the danger while dismissing it, those recordings could be crucial evidence. "I have to warn you, though," Marcus said, "this kind of situation can escalate quickly once the perpetrator realizes they're being documented. You need to prioritize your physical safety above everything else." Karla left the attorney's office with a clear action plan, but also a sobering awareness of the risks involved. She was no longer just dealing with a difficult family situation. She was potentially building a legal case against someone who lived in the same house and had increasing access to her food, belongings, and daily routine. That evening, she implemented the first phase of her strategy. When Victoria began her usual routine of questioning the necessity of Karla's allergy medications, Karla was ready with her phone's voice recorder activated. "I just think you're being a little over-dependent on all these medical interventions," Victoria said as they cleaned up after dinner. "My friend Jennifer's daughter had food sensitivities, and she overcame them through positive thinking and dietary changes." Food sensitivities and life-threatening allergies are different conditions, Karla replied calmly. keeping her voice level for the recording. Oh, that allergist. These doctors make their living convincing people they're sicker than they are. Of course she's going to tell you it's serious. You're paying her bills. So you don't believe my allergies are genuinely life-threatening? Karla asked, her heart racing as she realized Victoria was about to make exactly the kind of statement Marcus had said they needed. I think you've convinced yourself they are. And now you've convinced everyone else, too. But bodies don't just randomly try to kill themselves over a few nuts or some shrimp. That's not how biology works. The recording captured not only Victoria's dismissal of medical expertise, but also her fundamental disbelief in the severity of Karla's condition. It was exactly the kind of evidence Marcus had said would demonstrate willful endangerment rather than simple ignorance. Over the next week, Karla documented 3 more concerning incidents using the Allergy Shield app. Victoria accidentally used the same cutting board for preparing both a walnut salad and Karla's sandwich ingredients. She placed a new bottle of almond-scented hand lotion directly next to Karla's toothbrush in their shared bathroom. Most disturbingly, she suggested they all attend a seafood festival in Long Beach as a fun family outing. Each incident was meticulously documented. Photographs, timestamps, GPS locations, and Victoria's exact words when questioned about potential cross-contamination risks. The app created detailed reports that painted a clear picture of escalating environmental dangers in Karla's own home. But the most significant development came when Karla decided to test Victoria's reaction to direct medical information. She left Dr. Chen's environmental safety protocol document on the kitchen counter, where Victoria would certainly see it. Victoria's response was immediate and revealing. Rather than showing concern or asking questions about the guidelines, she became visibly angry. Are you seriously trying to dictate household rules based on your imaginary medical drama? This is my house now too, and I refuse to live like we're operating a medical facility. These aren't my rules, Karla replied, again recording the conversation. They're medical safety protocols developed by specialists. Specialists who don't have to live with the constant anxiety and expense of catering to your supposed condition. I've had enough of this manipulation, Karla. Either you start living like a normal person or you find somewhere else to live. The ultimatum hung in the air like a threat, but Karla felt a strange triumph. Victoria had just provided clear evidence that she was aware of medical safety protocols but chose to reject them, putting her health at deliberate risk. More importantly, Victoria was now pressuring her to leave the family home rather than accommodate basic safety measures. That night, as Karla reviewed her growing collection of evidence, she realized that she had crossed a crucial threshold. She was no longer just documenting suspicious behavior, she was building a comprehensive case that demonstrated a clear pattern of medical endangerment. The question now was whether Victoria would back down when confronted with the strength of Karla's documentation, or whether she would escalate her dangerous behavior in response to feeling cornered. The first step had been taken, but Karla sensed that Victoria's next move would be far more dangerous than anything that had come before.
Victoria's ultimatum marked the beginning of what Karla would later describe as psychological warfare with a medical twist. Rather than backing down or finding alternative living arrangements, Karla made a strategic decision that surprised even herself. She would stay and fight, but with allies who could provide both emotional support and professional credibility. Her first ally came from an unexpected source. Jessica Martinez, a nurse practitioner at the urgent care clinic where Karla had been treated for a minor allergic reaction the previous year, reached out after Dr. Chen shared her concerns about Karla's home environment. Jessica specialized in medical advocacy for patients facing family-related health challenges, and she offered to conduct what she called a home safety assessment. "I've seen cases like this before," Jessica explained during their coffee meeting at a small cafe in downtown Riverside. "Family members who don't understand the severity of allergic conditions sometimes create dangerous environments without realizing it. But what you're describing sounds more deliberate." Jessica was in her late 30s, with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who had seen too many preventable medical emergencies.
She carried herself with the confidence of a healthcare professional who wasn't easily intimidated, exactly the kind of person Karla needed in her corner. A home safety assessment involves documenting potential allergen sources throughout the living space. I photograph everything from food storage practices to cross-contamination risks. If there are deliberate safety violations, it creates a legal record that can protect you if something serious happens. The assessment was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon when Victoria would be showing houses in Orange County. Jessica arrived with a professional camera, testing equipment for detecting trace allergens, and official documentation forms that gave the evaluation legal weight. What Jessica discovered exceeded even Karla's worst suspicions. Using a specialized scanner that detected protein residues, Jessica found traces of tree nuts in places where they had no logical reason to exist. Inside Karla's supposedly safe food containers, on her bedroom doorknob, even on her toothbrush handle. This isn't accidental cross-contamination, Jessica said grimly, photographing the scanner readings. Someone has been deliberately placing allergen residues on items you touch regularly. The concentration levels on your personal belongings are actually higher than what we found in the kitchen. The most disturbing discovery came in Karla's bathroom. Jessica's scanner detected massive amounts of almond protein residue inside Karla's daily moisturizer, a product Karla had been using for weeks without realizing it had been contaminated. The levels were so high that Jessica immediately sealed the container as evidence. "Karla, you could have had a severe reaction just from applying this to your skin." Whoever did this understood exactly how much allergen exposure would be needed to trigger a response through dermal contact. Jessica's assessment revealed a level of medical knowledge that went beyond simple ignorance or carelessness. The contamination patterns suggested someone who understood absorption rates, exposure thresholds, and the cumulative effects of repeated low-level allergen contact. It wasn't just malicious, it was scientifically informed malice. While Jessica documented her findings, Karla decided to take an even bolder step. She contacted her father's sister, Amanda Knox Williams, who lived in Phoenix and worked as a medical malpractice investigator. Aunt Amanda had always been the family's voice of reason, and she had maintained a cautious but polite relationship with Victoria over the years. The phone conversation with Amanda was a revelation. When Karla described the recent incidents in Jessica's findings, Amanda was silent for a long moment before speaking. "Karla, I need to tell you something I probably should have mentioned earlier. When your father first started dating Victoria, I did some background checking. Not invasive, just basic verification of the things she told us about her life." Amanda's investigation had uncovered several concerning inconsistencies in Victoria's background. Her claimed nursing education from a community college in San Diego couldn't be verified. The school had no record of her enrollment. Her previous marriage, which she said ended amicably due to growing apart, had actually involved a restraining order filed by her ex-husband, citing systematic psychological manipulation and medical harassment. "Medical harassment?" Karla asked, her blood running cold. The ex-husband claimed Victoria had deliberately triggered his son's asthma attacks to prove the condition was psychosomatic. The case was settled out of court and the records are sealed, but the basic filing information is still accessible. Amanda offered to fly to California and help Karla document everything professionally. As a medical malpractice investigator, she had access to resources and expertise that could build an unassailable case if Victoria's behavior continued to escalate. Meanwhile, Karla's relationship with her father became increasingly strained as she tried to protect him from the full extent of her discoveries, while also gauging his awareness of Victoria's behavior. The conversation she finally initiated was both heartbreaking and illuminating. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you noticed anything unusual about my allergic reactions since Victoria moved in?"
Robert looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with the television remote. "I don't know, honey. Medical stuff isn't really my area. Victorina says you've been more anxious about food lately." Anxious or having more actual reactions requiring emergency medication? "Well, You have been using those EpiPens more often, Robert admitted. Victoria mentioned it's been expensive. Karla felt her heart sink as she realized her father was already being influenced by Victoria's narrative. To test his awareness further, she showed him one of Jessica's photographs, the image of allergen residue on her toothbrush handle. "Dad, how do you think tree nut proteins ended up on my toothbrush in concentrations high enough to trigger allergic reactions?" Robert stared at the photograph for a long time. When he finally looked up, his expression was troubled. "I don't know, Karla. Maybe we should all sit down and talk about this as a family." But the family conversation Robert suggested never happened because Victoria's behavior took a dramatic new turn. She began inviting medical professionals to the house, not to help with Karla's condition, but to second-guess it. The first was Dr. Patricia Womack, a psychiatrist who specialized in conversion disorders and somatic illness. Victoria introduced her as a family friend, but it quickly became clear that Dr. Womack had been briefed on Karla's case and had formed opinions about her mental state without ever conducting a proper evaluation. "Anxiety-related food aversions are much more common than people realize," Dr. Womack said during what was supposed to be a casual dinner conversation. "Sometimes young adults use medical symptoms to maintain dependence on their families rather than achieving full independence." Karla was stunned by the blatant boundary violation of having a mental health professional make unsolicited assessments in her own home. But she was also impressed by Victoria's sophistication. Rather than continuing to dismiss Karla's allergies outright, Victoria was now recruiting professional support for an alternative narrative that painted Karla as psychologically disturbed rather than medically vulnerable. The strategy became clearer when Victoria arranged for a second consultation with Dr. Richard Brennan, a physician who had written controversial articles questioning the prevalence of food allergies in adults. Dr. Brennan spent an evening reviewing Karla's medical history and EpiPen usage logs, not to provide care, but to offer opinions about whether her documented reactions were consistent with genuine allergic responses. Many cases of adult-onset allergy sensitivity are actually manifestations of anxiety disorders, Dr. Brennan explained to the family. The adrenaline response from anxiety can mimic allergic reactions quite convincingly. Victoria watched this performance with barely concealed satisfaction, occasionally adding comments like, "I've wondered about that myself. Karla's reactions do seem to coincide with stressful situations." Karla realized she was witnessing something truly insidious. Victoria wasn't just gaslighting her anymore. She was building a professional consensus that Karla's allergies were psychological rather than medical. If this narrative took hold, it would discredit all of Karla's documentation and leave her completely vulnerable to future exposures that could be dismissed as panic attacks. The situation reached a new level of psychological manipulation when Victoria suggested that Karla undergo exposure therapy under Dr. Brennan's supervision. The proposed treatment involved controlled exposure to small amounts of her known allergens to desensitize her anxiety responses. "It's a perfectly safe procedure," she assured Robert, "and it would finally give us definitive answers about whether Karla's reactions are medical or psychological." Karla understood immediately that this was potentially a death sentence disguised as medical treatment. Exposure therapy for genuine food allergies wasn't just ineffective, it was potentially fatal. The fact that Victoria was proposing it while claiming concern for Karla's well-being revealed the true depth of her manipulative capabilities. That night, as Karla updated her documentation with recordings of the conversations with Dr. Womack and Dr. Brennan, she realized Victoria had escalated far beyond simple environmental sabotage. She was now attempting to build a medical and psychological case that would justify increasingly dangerous treatments while providing legal cover for any harm that resulted. The deepening had revealed Victoria's true nature, not just someone who disbelieved Karla's allergies, but someone who was systematically constructing a framework that would allow her to endanger Karla's life while appearing to act in her best interests. The question now was whether Karla's growing alliance of legitimate medical professionals could counter Victoria's manufactured consensus before the proposed exposure therapy became a reality.
The exposure therapy proposal set off alarm bells that extended far beyond Karla's immediate support network. When Dr. Chen received Victoria's formal request for a controlled allergen exposure protocol forwarded through Dr. Brennan's office, her response was immediate and unequivocal. She contacted the California Medical Board to report what she considered a potentially dangerous and unethical treatment suggestion. What they're proposing isn't just medically inappropriate, Dr. Chen explained during an emergency consultation with Karla. It's potentially criminal. Deliberate exposure of a documented high-risk patient to known fatal allergens under the guise of treatment could constitute attempted murder if something goes wrong. Dr. Chen's report triggered an investigation that would ultimately expose the entire network of complicit medical professionals Victoria had assembled. But in the short term, it also pushed Victoria to accelerate her timeline dramatically, leading to the most dangerous week of Karla's life. The crisis began on December 18th with what appeared to be a medical emergency involving Robert. Karla received a frantic call at work from Victoria, claiming that her father had collapsed at home and been rushed to Riverside Community Hospital. Victoria's voice was convincingly panicked, filled with the kind of raw emotion that made Karla's professional skepticism evaporate instantly. "Please come quickly," Victoria sobbed over the phone. "They think it might be his heart. The doctors want to speak with family members about treatment decisions." Karla left work immediately and drove to the hospital in a state of absolute terror. Her father had been her anchor throughout the nightmare with Victoria, and the thought of losing him while their relationship was strained felt unbearable. She arrived at the hospital to find Victoria in the waiting room, red-eyed and clutching tissues. "They've stabilized him," Victoria said, embracing Karla with what seemed like genuine relief. "But they want to keep him overnight for observation. The doctors say stress might have been a contributing factor." What Karla didn't know was that Robert's medical emergency had been carefully orchestrated. Victoria had convinced him to take a new blood pressure medication she'd obtained from Dr. Brennan, claiming it was a preventative measure recommended by their family physician. The medication had caused a dramatic but temporary drop in blood pressure that mimicked the symptoms of a cardiac event. While Karla sat in the hospital waiting room, Victoria excused herself to handle insurance paperwork, but actually returned home to implement the most dangerous phase of her plan. Using Karla's absence, Victoria systematically contaminated every surface in Karla's bedroom with concentrated allergen extracts she had purchased from a research supply company using Dr. Brennan's credentials. The contamination wasn't random. Victoria had researched the exact concentrations needed to trigger delayed allergic reactions that would build gradually over several hours of exposure. Her goal was to create a medical crisis that would occur while Karla was alone in the house, allowing Victoria to control the narrative about what had happened. Karla spent the night at the hospital, sleeping fitfully in an uncomfortable chair beside her father's bed. Robert seemed genuinely confused about his collapse, mentioning that he'd felt fine earlier in the day before suddenly becoming dizzy and nauseous. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Kim, ordered comprehensive cardiac tests that would ultimately find no underlying heart problems. "Sometimes these episodes can be triggered by medication interactions or stress," Dr. Kim explained to Karla the next morning. "Your father's heart is actually in excellent condition for his age. We're recommending he follow up with his primary care physician to review all his current medications." When they finally returned home on December 19th, Karla was exhausted but relieved that her father's health scare had turned out to be minor. Victoria played the role of the devoted wife perfectly, fussing over Robert's comfort and insisting that Karla get some rest in her own room. "You look absolutely exhausted, sweetheart," she said with apparent concern. "Why don't you take a long shower and get some sleep?
I'll take care of your father. Karla's room had been transformed into a death trap during her absence, but the contamination was invisible and odorless. Within 20 minutes of entering the space, she began experiencing the early symptoms of a severe allergic reaction. The familiar tingling in her lips, the scratchy throat sensation, and the gradual tightening in her chest. But this reaction was different from her previous episodes. Instead of the rapid onset she was accustomed to, her symptoms built slowly and steadily, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly when she had been exposed to allergens. By the time she realized she needed her EpiPen, her coordination was already compromised by the systemic allergic response. Victoria had calculated the timing perfectly. As Karla's reaction intensified, she was downstairs with Robert, establishing an alibi by engaging in loud conversation about his hospital discharge instructions. When Karla finally managed to call out for help, her voice was already weakened by throat swelling. "Victoria!" Karla called, but her voice barely carried beyond her bedroom door. She stumbled toward her emergency medical kit, but her vision was becoming blurred, and her hands were shaking uncontrollably.
The Allergy Shield app on her phone automatically detected her elevated heart rate and GPS location, sending emergency alerts to her contact list. But Victoria had anticipated this. She had convinced Robert to turn off his phone notifications while he rested, claiming the constant buzzing would interfere with his recovery. Karla managed to administer her first EpiPen, but the reaction continued to intensify. The allergen concentrations Victoria had used were designed to overwhelm a single dose of epinephrine. As her breathing became increasingly labored, Karla realized she was facing a potentially fatal reaction with no immediate help available. In desperation, she used her phone's emergency SOS feature, which automatically contacted 911 and sent her location to emergency services. The call was answered by dispatcher Angela Torres, whose calm professionalism became Karla's lifeline during the most terrifying minutes of her life. 911, what's your emergency? Severe allergic reaction, Karla gasped into the phone. Used EpiPen, but getting worse. Need paramedics immediately. I'm dispatching emergency medical services to your location now, Angela replied. Stay on the line with me. Have you been exposed to any known allergens today? Don't know, Karla struggled to speak clearly. Was at hospital all night with father. Came home, went to bedroom, reaction started. Angela kept Karla talking while coordinating with the paramedic team, but more importantly, she was recording everything Karla said about the circumstances of her reaction. These recordings would later become crucial evidence in the investigation that followed. Victoria's response to the arrival of paramedics was Oscar-worthy in its apparent panic and concern. She met the emergency team at the door, explaining that her stepdaughter had severe allergies and might have accidentally exposed herself to something dangerous. She's been under tremendous stress lately, Victoria told paramedic supervisor Mike Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen. Her father was hospitalized yesterday with a cardiac episode, and she's been very anxious about it. Sometimes stress can trigger these reactions. But Victoria's performance had a crucial flaw. She demonstrated too much knowledge about Karla's specific reaction patterns and treatment protocols. When Mike asked about Karla's usual EpiPen dosage requirements, Victoria provided detailed information that she could not have known unless she had been researching and monitoring Karla's medical responses. She usually needs 2 doses for severe reactions. The first one rarely stops the progression completely. You should probably prepare for intubation if her airway continues to swell. Mike found Victoria's clinical knowledge suspicious. Most family members of allergy patients had basic first aid knowledge, but Victoria was describing advanced treatment protocols with the familiarity of a medical professional. As the paramedics worked to stabilize Karla, Mike quietly activated his body camera and began asking Victoria more detailed questions about the timeline of Karla's reaction. Victoria's answers revealed concerning inconsistencies. She claimed to have been downstairs caring for Robert when the reaction began, but she knew specific details about the progression of Karla's symptoms that suggested direct observation. Karla was transported to Riverside Community Hospital in critical condition, requiring multiple doses of epinephrine, corticosteroids, and intensive respiratory support.
The attending emergency physician, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, noted in her report that the severity and persistence of Karla's reaction suggested exposure to unusually high concentrations of allergens in an enclosed environment. While Karla fought for her life in the emergency room, Jessica Martinez received the automatic alert from the Allergy Shield app and immediately drove to the hospital. Her arrival set in motion a series of events that would ultimately expose Victoria's entire conspiracy. Jessica's first action was to contact the hospital's patient advocacy office and request that Karla's room be secured as a potential crime scene. Her second was to call Marcus Rodriguez, the attorney, and Dr. Chen, alerting them that the situation had escalated to attempted murder. Based on the severity of this reaction and the suspicious circumstances, Jessica explained to the hospital administrator, we need to treat this as a potential assault case rather than an accidental exposure. As Karla slowly stabilized in the hospital that night, a complex investigation was beginning that would ultimately unravel Victoria's entire web of deception. But Victoria, believing her plan had succeeded in discrediting Karla's credibility while appearing completely innocent, had no idea that her most dangerous gambit had actually provided investigators with the evidence they needed to expose her crimes. The trial by fire had nearly killed Karla, but it had also revealed the full extent of Victoria's murderous intentions and the sophisticated methods she used to disguise attempted murder as medical treatment.
While Karla recovered in the hospital's intensive care unit, a coordinated investigation was unfolding that would shatter Victoria's carefully constructed facade. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Patricia Womack, the psychiatrist Victoria had recruited to support her narrative about Karla's psychosomatic allergies. Dr. Womack had been troubled by Victoria's aggressive push for the exposure therapy protocol, and when she learned about Karla's near-fatal reaction, she made a decision that would prove pivotal. She contacted the California Medical Board's ethics hotline to report what she now recognized as a systematic attempt to manipulate medical professionals into participating in patient endangerment. I was approached by Victoria Chambers to provide psychiatric evaluation of her stepdaughter without proper consent or clinical protocols, Dr. Womack explained to investigator Dr. Rachel Stevens. She presented selective information designed to make me question the legitimacy of documented allergies, and she recorded our conversations without my knowledge or permission. Dr. Womack's confession opened floodgates. She provided detailed documentation of her interactions with Victoria, including emails where Victoria had offered payment for specific diagnostic opinions that would support her narrative. Most damaging was a recorded phone call where Victoria had explicitly asked Dr. Womack to recommend controlled exposure protocols that would definitively prove whether the allergies are real or fabricated. The medical board's investigation expanded rapidly when Dr. Womack revealed that Dr. Richard Brennan had been equally manipulated. Under questioning, Dr. Brennan admitted that Victoria had provided him with falsified medical records and selectively edited recordings of Karla's reactions that appeared to show anxiety symptoms rather than genuine allergic responses. She was very sophisticated in her presentation, Dr. Brennan told investigators. She provided what appeared to be objective documentation, including video evidence that seemed to support her concerns about psychiatric underlying factors. I never examined the patient directly. I relied entirely on the materials Victoria provided. The falsified evidence Victoria had created was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Investigators discovered that she had been using video editing software to alter recordings of Karla's allergic reactions, removing audio of breathing difficulties and throat swelling, while emphasizing moments that could be interpreted as panic or anxiety symptoms rather than genuine allergic responses. She had also created fake medical consultation notes, suggesting that previous physicians had questioned the severity of Karla's condition. But the most shocking revelation came when investigators examined Victoria's computer and discovered her research history. Over the past 6 months, Victoria had been systematically studying medical literature about food allergies, anaphylaxis treatment protocols, and forensic toxicology. Her browser history revealed searches for undetectable allergen exposure methods, delayed anaphylaxis timing, and insurance fraud related to fake allergies. Detective Maria Gonzalez, assigned to the case by Riverside Police Department, found Victoria's research particularly chilling. This wasn't someone acting impulsively out of ignorance, Detective Gonzalez explained to the prosecutor's office. This was a calculated, months-long campaign to either discredit the victim's medical condition or potentially kill her while making it appear accidental. The computer evidence also revealed Victoria's financial motivations. Email correspondence with insurance investigators showed that Victoria had been attempting to file claims suggesting Karla was committing medical fraud by faking allergies for attention and expensive treatments. Victoria had apparently believed that if she could prove Karla's allergies were fabricated, she could recoup thousands of dollars in fraudulent medical expenses while simultaneously removing what she saw as an obstacle to her marriage. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of Karla's bedroom revealed the sophisticated nature of Victoria's final attack. Environmental specialist Dr. Kim Patel discovered that Victoria had used commercial-grade allergen extracts designed for medical research, not the kind of accidental contamination that might occur from normal food preparation. The concentration levels we found were 50 to 100 times higher than what you'd expect from cross-contamination, Dr. Patel explained to the investigation team. These amounts could only have been achieved through deliberate application of purified allergen proteins. The distribution pattern throughout the room shows systematic, intentional placement designed to maximize exposure through multiple contact points. Dr. Patel's analysis revealed that Victoria had contaminated Karla's pillowcase, bed sheets, carpet, door handles, light switches, and even the air conditioning vents in her room. The allergen residue was so concentrated that it would have triggered severe reactions in anyone with tree nut allergies, not just someone with Karla's extreme sensitivity levels. The breakthrough in understanding Victoria's psychology came when investigators discovered her previous identity. Amanda Knox Williams' background research had only scratched the surface. Victoria Chambers wasn't even her real name. She was actually Victoria Brennan Hughes, and she had a documented history of medical manipulation spanning multiple states and relationships. Court records from Arizona revealed that Victoria had been involved in a similar case 5 years earlier, where her then-boyfriend's diabetic son had experienced a series of mysterious blood sugar crises that nearly resulted in coma. The case had been settled when Victoria suddenly moved to California, but not before the boy's medical team had documented concerns about environmental factors in the child's diabetes management. In Nevada, investigators found records of Victoria working as an unlicensed medical assistant in a clinic that specialized in allergy treatments. She had been terminated for unauthorized access to patient medical records and inappropriate dispensing of treatment materials. The clinic director noted that Victoria had shown unusual interest in severe allergy cases and emergency treatment protocols. But the most disturbing discovery was Victoria's connection to 2 previous deaths. In both cases, an elderly woman with severe asthma in Phoenix and a young man with epilepsy in Las Vegas, Victoria had been present as a caregiver when fatal medical episodes occurred. Neither case had been investigated as suspicious at the time, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. We're looking at someone who has potentially been engaged in serial medical homicide for over a decade, Detective Gonzalez told the prosecutor. She targets people with legitimate medical conditions, gains their trust or the trust of their families, and then either kills them or attempts to discredit their conditions for financial gain. The breakthrough in the case came when investigators discovered Victoria's detailed planning documents hidden in an encrypted folder on her laptop. The files contained a month-by-month timeline for resolving the Karla situation, complete with backup plans if her initial strategies failed. The documents revealed that Victoria's ultimate goal wasn't just to discredit Karla's allergies. She intended to trigger a fatal reaction that could be blamed on Karla's reckless behavior or psychological instability. Victoria had even drafted a letter to be discovered after Karla's death, supposedly written by Karla herself, confessing to faking her allergies and expressing suicidal thoughts about living with the guilt of deceiving her family. She had planned this as a perfect murder, disguised as either suicide or accidental death. Marcus Rodriguez explained to Karla during their legal strategy sessions. The forged suicide note would have explained away any suspicions about the circumstances of your death while also protecting her from any legal consequences. Victoria's downfall accelerated when Robert Knox finally learned the truth about his wife's activities. Initially, he had been resistant to believing the allegations against Victoria, but when investigators showed him the evidence from her computer and the forensic analysis of Karla's bedroom, his denial crumbled. He keeps thinking about all the times she convinced me that Karla was being dramatic. Victoria would show me Karla's medical bills and suggest that she was taking advantage of our insurance. I actually started to believe that my daughter might be exaggerating her condition for attention. Robert's cooperation proved crucial when he revealed that Victoria had been secretly recording conversations with him about Karla's medical expenses and his frustration with the constant emergency room visits. Victoria had planned to use these recordings to support her narrative that the family had been victimized by Karla's fraudulent medical claims. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when investigators discovered Victoria's correspondence with life insurance companies. She had been researching policies on Karla's life and had even submitted preliminary applications, listing herself as the beneficiary due to her role as stepmother and primary caregiver. As the investigation reached its conclusion, Karla was presented with evidence of a conspiracy so elaborate and malicious that it defied belief. Victoria hadn't just been trying to make her life difficult. She had been systematically planning her murder while simultaneously building a legal and financial framework that would have made her wealthy while appearing completely innocent of any wrongdoing. The breakthrough had revealed Victoria's true identity as a serial predator who specialized in medical manipulation and murder, but more importantly for Karla, it had validated everything she had suspected and documented, proving that her careful evidence gathering had literally saved her life and potentially prevented Victoria from claiming future victims. The question now was whether the overwhelming evidence against Victoria would be enough to ensure justice and protect other potential victims from her sophisticated and deadly methods. The arrest of Victoria Brennan Hughes on charges of attempted murder, medical fraud, and conspiracy to commit homicide marked the beginning of Karla's most challenging phase, learning to integrate the truth of what had happened while rebuilding her life and sense of safety. The legal proceedings would take months, but the psychological recovery would take much longer. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh assembled a prosecution team that specialized in complex medical crimes, recognizing that Victoria's case would set important precedents for how the legal system handled systematic medical endangerment. The challenge wasn't just proving Victoria's guilt, the evidence was overwhelming, but ensuring that her sophisticated methods of manipulation and attempted murder were fully understood by a jury who might struggle to comprehend the level of premeditation involved. Lead prosecutor David Chen, coincidentally sharing a surname with Karla's allergist, though unrelated, had prosecuted medical professionals for patient abuse before, but he'd never encountered a case where someone had spent months researching murder methods while simultaneously building a legal framework to justify their victim's death. Victoria's plan was so elaborate that she had backup strategies for her backup strategies, Prosecutor Chen explained to Karla during trial preparation. She wasn't just trying to kill you. She was trying to create a situation where your death would be seen as inevitable, even merciful, while she appeared to be the long-suffering family member who had tried everything to help.
The trial preparation revealed additional victims that investigators were still uncovering. A task force led by Detective Gonzalez had been established to review suspicious deaths and medical emergencies in every state where Victoria had lived over the past 15 years. The preliminary findings were staggering. At least 7 cases showed patterns consistent with Victoria's methods, and 3 additional families had come forward with stories of mysterious medical episodes involving their relatives after Victoria entered their lives. One of the most compelling testimonies came from Janet Morrison, whose elderly mother had died of an apparent asthma attack while Victoria was working as her unlicensed home care aide in Phoenix. Janet had always been suspicious about the circumstances of her mother's death, particularly Victoria's unusually detailed knowledge of the timing and progression of her mother's final attack. Victoria seemed to know exactly when my mother was going to have breathing difficulties, Janet testified during the preliminary hearings. She would prepare nebulizer treatments hours before they were needed, and she always had emergency medications ready at precisely the right moments. At the time, I thought she was just an exceptionally attentive caregiver, but now I realize she was orchestrating the very emergencies she appeared to be managing. For Karla, hearing these testimonies was both validating and traumatizing. Each story confirmed that her instincts about Victoria had been correct, but they also revealed the true scope of Victoria's predatory behavior and the likelihood that without Karla's documentation and survival, Victoria would have continued killing indefinitely. The integration process was complicated by the fact that Karla's father, Robert, was also a victim of Victoria's manipulation, albeit a psychological one rather than a medical one. Robert entered therapy to process his role in enabling Victoria's behavior and his failure to protect his daughter. The guilt and shame he experienced were compounded by investigators' discovery that Victoria had been systematically isolating him from family members and friends who might have questioned her behavior. She convinced me that everyone was overreacting to Karla's medical needs, Robert explained during one of their family therapy sessions facilitated by Dr. Susan Martinez, a specialist in trauma recovery. She made me feel like I was being a bad husband if I didn't support her perspective, and a bad father if I enabled what she claimed was Karla's attention-seeking behavior. Dr. Martinez helped both Robert and Karla understand that Victoria's manipulation tactics were sophisticated psychological warfare designed to isolate their targets and create doubt in their support systems. Victoria had studied not just medical methods of harm, but also psychological techniques for undermining family relationships and personal confidence. Predators like Victoria are skilled at identifying and exploiting existing family tensions. She recognized that Robert's grief over his wife's death and his desire to create a new family dynamic made him vulnerable to someone who promised to solve his daughter's complex medical needs. The therapy sessions revealed that Victoria had been manipulating Robert's perceptions for far longer than anyone had realized. She had gradually introduced doubts about Karla's condition by sharing carefully selected articles about fake allergies, showing him edited videos of Karla's reactions that emphasized anxiety symptoms over medical distress, and even arranging for him to overhear phone conversations where she expressed concern about Karla's psychological state.
Meanwhile, Karla was working with a new medical team to address the long-term effects of her prolonged exposure to allergens and the trauma of repeated life-threatening reactions. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, an immunologist specializing in allergy-related PTSD, helped Karla understand that her hypervigilance around food and environmental triggers was now compounded by the knowledge that someone had deliberately weaponized her medical condition. Your allergic reactions were already a form of trauma for your nervous system, Dr. Rodriguez explained, but knowing that someone was intentionally triggering these responses adds a layer of psychological complexity that we need to address alongside your medical management. Dr. Rodriguez introduced Karla to a treatment approach that combined traditional allergy management with trauma-informed care. This included updating her emergency action plans to account for potential sabotage scenarios, establishing new protocols for food safety that assumed potential contamination, and developing psychological coping strategies for the anxiety that came with knowing her medical condition had been used as a weapon against her. The legal proceedings moved forward with unprecedented cooperation from medical professionals, law enforcement agencies, and victim advocacy organizations. The case had attracted national attention as an example of a new category of domestic violence, medical abuse, that used sophisticated knowledge of a victim's health conditions to inflict harm while maintaining plausible deniability. Karla found herself becoming an inadvertent spokesperson for medical abuse awareness, sharing her story with advocacy groups and helping to develop protocols for identifying and documenting systematic medical endangerment. Her meticulous record-keeping had become a model for how victims could protect themselves while building legal cases against their abusers. What saved Karla's life wasn't just her documentation, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic psychiatrist who had studied Victoria's case intensively. It was her ability to maintain objectivity about her own experiences despite intensive gaslighting. She never allowed Victoria to convince her that her perceptions were wrong, even when everyone around her was being manipulated to doubt her. The integration phase also involved practical considerations about Karla's future safety and independence. With Victoria awaiting trial and potentially facing life in prison, Karla needed to rebuild her life while remaining vigilant about potential threats from Victoria's associates or copycat criminals who might target her due to the publicity surrounding the case. Security consultant Michael Torres worked with Karla to develop comprehensive safety protocols that addressed both her medical vulnerabilities and the ongoing legal situation. This included establishing secure communication channels with her medical team, creating backup emergency plans that couldn't be compromised by sabotage, and developing strategies for detecting potential contamination in her living and work environments. Victoria's methods were sophisticated enough that other predators will study this case, Torres explained. We need to assume that Karla's high profile as a survivor makes her a potential target for anyone wanting to prove they can succeed where Victoria failed. The integration phase was perhaps the most challenging aspect of Karla's recovery. Learning to trust her own perceptions again after months of gaslighting required intensive therapy and the support of a carefully vetted network of family, friends, and medical professionals. She had to relearn to eat without constant anxiety, to how to sleep in her own space without fear of contamination, and how to maintain relationships without suspecting everyone of potential deception. One of the most powerful moments in Karla's recovery came when she met with other survivors of medical abuse from around the country. The network of survivors, facilitated by the National Center for Victims of Medical Crimes, provided Karla with perspectives from people who had faced similar systematic betrayals of trust and medical safety. Meeting other survivors showed me that what Victoria did wasn't unique, but my response to it was, Karla reflected. Most victims of medical abuse don't have the resources or knowledge to document what's happening to them effectively. I was lucky to have medical training in my background and access to professionals who believed me. As the trial date approached, Karla had integrated the trauma of her experience into a renewed sense of purpose and strength. She understood now that her survival wasn't just a personal victory. It was a crucial step in exposing a type of predatory behavior that thrived on secrecy and victim isolation. The integration phase had transformed Karla from a victim fighting for survival into an advocate working to prevent other families from experiencing similar betrayals. Her documentation methods were being taught to medical professionals, her story was helping law enforcement recognize the signs of medical abuse, and her recovery was proving that even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy someone's sense of reality could be overcome with proper support and determination.
18 months after Victoria's arrest, Karla Knox stood before the California Senate Judiciary Committee as the primary advocate for the Medical Abuse Prevention Act. legislation that would fundamentally change how the legal system addresses systematic medical endangerment. The woman who had once been afraid to challenge her stepmother's gaslighting was now testifying before lawmakers about the need for comprehensive legal protections for victims of medical abuse. Senators, medical abuse is not a new crime, but it's a hidden epidemic that thrives on our collective inability to imagine that someone would deliberately harm another person using their most vulnerable health conditions, Karla testified, her voice steady and confident. My case was not unique in its methods, only in its documentation. Across this country, predators are using sophisticated knowledge of medical conditions to harm, control, and kill their victims while appearing to be devoted caregivers. The legislation Karla was advocating for had emerged directly from the legal precedents established during Victoria's prosecution. The trial, which had concluded 6 months earlier with Victoria receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole, had exposed gaps in existing laws that made it difficult to prosecute medical abuse cases effectively. Victoria's conviction had been groundbreaking in multiple ways. She was found guilty on 17 counts, including attempted murder, aggravated assault, medical fraud, conspiracy to commit homicide, and multiple counts of elder abuse related to her previous victims. The prosecution had successfully argued that Victoria's actions constituted a new category of premeditated homicide, serial killing disguised as medical caregiving. Judge Patricia Morrison, who presided over the trial, had noted in her sentencing statement that Victoria's case represented the most sophisticated and premeditated attempt at medical homicide the court had ever encountered. Victoria's detailed planning documents, her research into murder methods, and her systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals established her as what legal experts termed a medical serial killer. But for Karla, Victoria's conviction was just the beginning of her transformation into a leading voice for medical abuse prevention and victim advocacy. She had used the 18 months since her near-death experience to completely reshape her career and life purpose around protecting others from similar predatory behavior. Working with the newly established National Center for Medical Abuse Prevention, Karla had developed training programs for medical professionals to recognize the warning signs of systematic medical endangerment. The programs, now implemented in hospitals and clinics across 12 states, taught healthcare workers to identify patterns of suspicious medical emergencies, unusual caregiver behavior, and environmental factors that might indicate deliberate harm. Medical professionals are often the first line of defense against medical abuse, but they haven't been trained to recognize it, Karla explained to Dr. Amanda Richards, director of the Emergency Medicine Residency Program at UCLA Medical Center. Victoria was able to manipulate multiple doctors because they assumed that family members always act in the patient's best interest. We need to change that assumption. The training programs included protocols for documenting suspicious cases, procedures for protecting potential victims, and guidelines for reporting concerns to law enforcement agencies equipped to handle medical crime investigations. Karla's own documentation methods had been refined into standardized procedures that could be implemented by anyone suspecting they were being medically abused. One of the most significant outcomes of Karla's advocacy work was the establishment of specialized medical crime investigation units in major police departments across California. Detective Maria Gonzalez, who had led the investigation into Victoria's crimes, was now heading the first dedicated medical abuse investigation division in Riverside County. Karla's case taught us that medical abuse requires specialized knowledge to investigate effectively, Detective Gonzalez explained. We've trained investigators in medical terminology, allergy science, and the psychological profiles of medical predators. We're now identifying cases that would have been dismissed as accidents or natural deaths just 2 years ago. The specialized units had already uncovered 15 additional cases of suspected medical abuse, resulting in 8 arrests and preventing what investigators believed would have been multiple deaths. The success of these programs had led to federal funding for expanding medical crime investigation capabilities nationwide. Karla's personal transformation extended beyond her professional advocacy work. She had moved into her own apartment in downtown Los Angeles, establishing complete independence while maintaining a carefully managed relationship with her father. Robert's recovery from Victoria's manipulation had been slower and more complicated than Karla's, but their relationship had ultimately emerged stronger and more honest.
I had to learn to forgive my father for being manipulated, and he had to learn to forgive himself, Karla reflected during an interview for a documentary about her case. Victoria was a professional predator who had perfected her techniques over decades. Neither of us should have been expected to recognize what she was doing without help.
Robert had become an advocate in his own right, speaking to support groups for family members of medical abuse victims and sharing his experience of being manipulated into questioning his own daughter's medical needs. His testimony before the Senate committee had been particularly powerful in demonstrating how medical predators systematically isolate their victims by undermining family support systems. The documentary about Karla's case, titled The Allergen Files, A Daughter's Fight for Survival, had premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was now being used as an educational tool in medical schools, law enforcement academies, and victim advocacy programs. The film's impact had extended internationally, with several countries reaching out to Karla for consultation on developing their own medical abuse prevention protocols. Perhaps the most profound aspect of Karla's transformation was her relationship with her own medical condition. Working with Dr. Elena Rodriguez and a team of specialists, she had developed what they termed empowered allergen management, a comprehensive approach that treated her medical needs as strengths rather than vulnerabilities. Karla has transformed her hypervigilance about allergens from a trauma response into a sophisticated early warning system, Dr. Rodriguez explained. She's developed intuitive abilities to detect potential contamination that exceed what most medical equipment can achieve. Her condition, which Victoria tried to use as a weakness, has become her greatest source of power and advocacy credibility. Karla's Allergy Shield documentation system had evolved into a comprehensive medical safety platform used by thousands of allergy patients worldwide. The platform, now called MedGuard Pro, included features for detecting environmental hazards, connecting with verified safe food suppliers, and maintaining secure communication with medical teams who understood the realities of living with severe allergies. The impact of Karla's work had reached beyond individual cases to influence policy at the highest levels. The Department of Health and Human Services had established new guidelines for investigating suspicious medical emergencies, and the FDA had implemented stricter controls on the sale of research-grade allergen extracts that could be misused for harmful purposes. What started as one woman's fight for survival has become a national movement to protect vulnerable patients from predatory caregivers, said Senator Rebecca Martinez, who had championed the Medical Abuse Prevention Act. Karla Knox has transformed a personal trauma into a legacy that will protect countless families from similar betrayals. The legislation that emerged from Karla's advocacy efforts was comprehensive and forward-thinking. The Medical Abuse Prevention Act established federal definitions of medical abuse, created funding for specialized investigation units, mandated training for healthcare workers, and established victim protection services specifically designed for medical abuse cases. On the second anniversary of Victoria's arrest, Karla visited her old neighborhood in Riverside for the first time since the attack. The house where she had nearly died had been sold, and a new family with young children was living there safely. Standing on the sidewalk where paramedics had rushed to save her life, Karla felt a profound sense of completion. "I used to see this place as the site of my greatest vulnerability," Karla said, speaking to Jessica Martinez, who had remained one of her closest allies and friends. "Now I see it as the birthplace of my true strength. Victoria tried to destroy me here, but instead, she created the person I was meant to become." The transformation was complete. Karla Knox had evolved from a young woman living in fear of her stepmother's manipulation into a national leader in medical abuse prevention, a survivor whose documentation had not only saved her own life, but had fundamentally changed how society recognizes and responds to medical predatory behavior. Her story had become a testament to the power of meticulous documentation, the importance of trusting one's own perceptions despite gaslighting, and the possibility of transforming even the most traumatic experiences into forces for positive change. Victoria's attempt to silence and destroy Karla had instead amplified her voice and created a legacy of protection for vulnerable patients across the country.
Most importantly, Karla's transformation demonstrated that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about using that experience to ensure that others would never have to face similar threats alone. The EpiPen usage log that started as desperate self-protection had become the foundation for a national movement that would protect countless lives for generations to come.
Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.